hello, my name is Geno Samuel, and welcome back to Discographies Yes, where I go through every Yes album from oldest to newest, offering an overview, analysis, and casual history lesson on each one. So, last we heard of Yes, they had broken up and gone their separate ways. Chris Squire and Alan White were being assisted by Atlantic Records, looking for a guitarist to work with for a possible new band. They were introduced to the young Trevor Rabin, who had been a member of the South African band Rabbit, and he himself had released a few solo albums already. He had just moved to LA, hoping to record a new album. The trio played through a session together and saw potential in a future lineup, and Rabin turned down an offer from RCA Records for a solo album and decided to sign up for whatever this new band was going to be. They ended up using some musical ideas first devised by White, Squire, and Jimmy Page on their aborted XYZ project, and lots of demos from Trevor Rabin himself, who was quite a prolific songwriter. His demo tapes included early drafts of songs like Changes, Hold On, and Owner of a Lonely Heart. They had a more accessible, pop rock style, and was a big driving force behind their project because they wanted to distance themselves from Yes as much as possible. Since their new music wasn't going to be as complex or flashy, they managed to recruit Tony Kaye, the original organ and piano man from Yes, who was better suited for the kind of music they were developing. Going ahead with their new four-member lineup, they decided to call themselves Cinema, with Rabin and Squire sharing lead vocal duties. They had auditioned Trevor Horn for a possible role as a new singer, but things didn't feel right, so he instead decided to produce their album instead, because by this time, he had pretty much stopped performing and was making a name for himself as a pretty competent record producer. They began recording an album for Atco Records, a subsidiary of Atlantic Records. After about 6 months of recording, Tony Kaye left the band, apparently after countless clashes with Horn, mostly due to his reluctance to adapt and learn the new keyboard technology that they were using. This left Rabin to record most of the keyboard parts himself. Furthermore, manager Phil Carson, who had been providing much of the funding for the album himself, said that Rabin and Squire's vocals weren't distinctive enough, and suggested that they get in touch with John Anderson. Anderson heard the tapes of the songs they were working on and liked them, and so he joined the lineup as well. He contributed vocals to the songs and also changed some lyrics to suit his own style better. But by then, the production of the album had exceeded $300,000, and they needed more money, so they got in touch with Atlantic Records president Ahmet Ertegun, who agreed to pay for the rest of the album. Kaye at the moment wasn't too sure on whether he was going to return to the lineup or not, and he was in limbo for a while. In 1983, it was announced that 4 former Yes members and 1 new guy teamed up and formed a new band called Cinema. This was followed by numerous threats of lawsuits from many smaller bands who were also called Cinema. So Carson decided that since the lineup now featured 3 original Yes members and the longest standing drummer of Yes, they should just call themselves Yes. It was just Yes at this point, but with a new guitarist as well. Rabin was very much against this because he wanted the music to be judged for itself, for its own merits, and furthermore he was well aware of how drastically different the sound of the 70s Yes was from the Cinema project. And for the majority of the recording process, they weren't going to be Yes, and were doing their dangdest to be as different as possible. They had already finished the artwork for the album cover, and it was going to be called 90125, which got lots of people thinking that it was a zip code in California maybe, like Beverly Hills 90210. But it's actually just the album catalog number. The artwork was designed by Gary Mouat on an Apple IIe computer, back when the band was still called Cinema. After some slight alterations, it was changed to Yes, with a very simplistic blocky colors and shapes design, which is what the band had wanted, to try out new technologies and move past the fantasy landscapes of Roger Dean, because as Cinema, they were nothing like Yes. With Kaye pretty much out of the band at that time, they got to work with promoting the new album with new keyboardist Eddie Jobson, formerly of Roxy Music and UK. But in order to further capitalize on the Yes novelty, the record company worked out a deal and got Tony Kaye back in the lineup, and were planning on including both keyboardists in the live lineup, but Jobson had issues with the inner politics of the band and left in 1984. So this somehow was turned into the new Yes album, made by the newly reformed and reimagined Yes. Of course, as we've already discussed, This was never meant to be the same band that had made Fragile and Close to the Edge, so we won't be judging the songs of old with the new, and we'll be looking at the album as it is, judging for what it is. The opening track, Owner of a Lonely Heart, their biggest commercial hit. The original ideas and demos for the track were created by Rabin some years prior. He came up with it while taking a dump. He even made a full band arrangement demo of it, which Trevor Horn heard, but he absolutely hated the verses on that version. I don't know, I liked it just fine, but it is more crowded and wordy than what the song eventually became. He was quite fond of the simple guitar riff, and sounded like a hit to him, so after lots of rewriting, it kind of became what it is today. They sampled a drum breakdown from the song Cool Is Back by jazz and soul funk group Funk Inc. onto a Fairlight CMI, and these are the muffled drums that you hear at the very beginning and in the bridge section. The drum sound is really unexpected, and looking at it now, it sounds like something you might hear at a rave, you know, like 90s underground dance music. And of course, sampling beats and instrumentals from older songs became a staple of hip-hop, and it was more of a rule really for the longest time. It still is though. So you could say that yes, we're one of the first, if not the first artists who used a drum beat sample in this way. A sample that functions like the drum beat for the song rather than just a sound effect snippet. Anyway, this sample in the intro is followed by the main guitar riff of the song, the simple 5 power chords motif, introducing the audience to new guy Trevor Rabin from the very beginning. It's a great riff, really simple, and not too heavy either. It's full of reverb in the beginning, and so are the brief fills from the drums and bass that are stuck in here as well. Then after a few cycles of that, the full band comes in with the beat, and the reverb is cut off completely. Now the instrumentals are quite dry and sterile, and this studio trickery of switching between heavy reverb and no reverb can be heard all over the record. Some solid cowbell playing in the intro too. There's also plenty of synthetic sounding horn stabs, which I think are played on a Fairlight CMI, but I could be wrong. The riff on guitar and bass goes on for the entirety of the verses and choruses, and apart from added and removed layers of keyboards and guitar in the back, the arrangement doesn't really change much. Anderson's singing gets some treatment reverb-wise, and it really helps his voice pop. It's a great powerful delivery, with lyrics sounding kind of disjointed and sound more like a selection of words rather than lyrics. So at least as far as lyrics go, Yes haven't lost their touch. The choruses are led by Rabin's soft overlaid vocals, with some contribution from John as well. Rabin was a really great singer, and he had a wide range of colors in his voice, from the soft love ballad setting to the gravelly hard-hitting rock tone. And also this is another thing that is kind of a trait of circumstance on this album, that because John Anderson joined the lineup so late, most of the songs were already finished, so he ended up changing and replacing some vocal sections rather than the full songs. So like in this song, this is why you have Anderson on the verses and Rabin in the choruses. One of the lyrics that Anderson added in verse 2 was the line, "Watch it now! The eagle in the sky." And to get back at him, changing the lyrics, Horn and engineer Gary Langan inserted a gunshot sound effect after it, thereby shooting down the eagle. The bridge section switches things up a bit with a new riff and more explicitly positive tonality. Keyboards remain pretty relaxed throughout, with just some light touches on synth strings and other soft pads. There's great dense vocal harmonies in this section. The band now finally have 3 competent singers, so their vocals are popping harder than ever. Then we get to revisit the opening drum sample, and lots of those horn stab samples artificially played at different pitches, and Anderson shrieking out, "Yeah!" Then Trevor Rabin comes in with a kick-ass guitar solo, displaying his prowess as a very 80s rock guitarist. Really cool effect with lots of tasteful panning and the utilization of a clone, which artificially adds a harmony line a fifth below whatever he's playing. The panning reminds me of the funk guitar break in Yours Is No Disgrace, actually. Anyway, the solo ends with a hard cut and the sound stops abruptly. In earlier Yes releases, this would be an editing quirk, but here, this is explicitly done in the name of style. Then the instruments build up again for one final chorus and a reprise of the earlier bridge section that leads into the fade out. Great solid track. Wonderful example of pop rock. It's quite soft and airy on the record, but they played it a lot heavier live. They filmed a music video for the song back when Eddie Jobson was in the lineup officially, but I think that by the time the video was released, Tony Kaye had rejoined the band and Jobson was no longer a part of it. So almost all of his appearances in the video were cut, except for a couple of wide shots where you can see him from the back. The video got lots of airplay on MTV and is part of the reason why it reached so many people and was such a huge hit. Next is Hold On, a number that was Frankenstein together from two Rabin demos, which both had the same feel and tempo. It's a song in 6/8 and features some great mellow guitar licks, all very tasteful and tasty. The verses are rather pleasant and light, with the melody line delivered in harmony pretty much all the way through. They do go into these brief instrumental linking sections where things get rather heavy. Rabin cranks up the overdrive and busts out some slow metal grooves. The beat and the time signature remind me of blues, and I'm sure that this was the basis of the song at its beginning, though by now it's changed its shape a lot. At a few instances in the song, Alan White switches up the beat and plays a couple of bars or so in 2/4 time, while the rest of the band remains in 6/8, and then they converge together at the end. It's another cool display of White's fondness for polyrhythm. The chorus is pretty simple and catchy, and like before, Rabin is commandeering the choruses. Each chorus introduces a new melody in the vocals that then gets layered on top of the previous ones, creating a rich soundscape of various vocal lines that live together harmoniously. Apart from a brief instrumental, guitar solo-led linking section in the final set of choruses, there really isn't a bridge segment, and it largely is just verse, chorus all the way through, with increasing buildup of vocal layers, delay effects, and growing intensity of the instrumentation until the fade-out. Another solid track. No issue with it really. Next is It Can Happen, largely composed by Chris Squire. The band had recorded it already as Cinema before Anderson joined, with Squire on lead vocals. It went through some changes after Anderson's inclusion, mostly during the verses. This track features a sitar playing the riff of the song in the beginning, bringing back memories of Steve Howe's choral guitar. The intro is a slow build-up of instruments, featuring bass drops of all things from Squire. There's one bass drop per bar, and it's honestly more bass drops than one's heart can handle. The intro ends with a snippet of the chorus melody and hook, "It can happen to you!" The verse takes a turn for the mysterious. It's quite suspenseful sounding, and vacant. Rabin stays in the back playing a muted guitar pattern reminiscent of Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall, maybe. There's this backing vocal line that fades in and travels from the right into the center, like the first snippet of the short phrase that's uttered in the middle, and then it echoes and fades out into the left side. It's so cool, and I've never heard anything like that before. Anderson's lyrics reference those traveling backing lines, linking them back to the main melody. It's so good. The verse is followed by a heavier pre-chorus section led vocally by Squire, and the choruses too are pretty much just Squire on lead vocals, and this is a carryover from the original cut by Cinema. The second verse features a halftime feel drum beat and a more simplified vocal arrangement. After a couple of cycles of the verse and chorus, they lead into the near obligatory by this point guitar solo. Trevor Rabin holds off on the overdrive for much of the song and presents a quite mellow and virtuosic solo played in unison on both electric and acoustic guitars. And you can hear some spoken dialogue in the section too, which is a quote taken from the play The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Then we get a reprise of the opening light sitar groove and a gradual buildup of instrumentation and vocal lines going through the chorus motif into the fade-out. I sense a pattern here. It's pretty good. It's not as strong as the previous tracks, I think. They released this one as a single too, and filmed a music video for it, where the makeup team put way too much makeup on Rabin, like full-on eyeshadow and contours, and he looked ridiculous. So that's why you don't actually get to see his face all that clearly in the video. The next song is Changes, also based largely on the Rabin demo. You look at the runtime and see, ooh, it's almost 6.5 minutes. This should be interesting, and interesting it is. It starts off with a riff on marimba, played in 17/8 time, or maybe a combination of different time signatures, which total 17/8 beats in the sequence. It's really mysterious and cool, with piano and then bass and drums fading in gradually, playing off that rhythm. Then the band kicks it into high gear and played as a full rock band proper. Rabin plays a wacky fast solo during this section on acoustic guitar, which I feel is a little misplaced. I think they were trying to do a thing like in Roundabout, with the acoustic guitar playing through an otherwise very rocky portion of the song. I'd much preferred to have been his beautifully powerful electric guitar tone that you hear later in the song. I mean, as it is, it's fine, but just, it could be better. They go through this motif for a little while, and then you hear a new element introduced in the background, a gentle acoustic guitar playing broken chords in 4/4 time, all while this crazy 17/8 section is going on. Then the complex rhythm segment ends their cycle and seamlessly leads right into the 4/4 section that was being introduced in a way by the guitar picking I mentioned earlier. This is an excellent display of compositional mathematics. Alan White said himself that lots of times the complexity of Yes rhythms and patterns is all about mathematics, and even though this album is largely pop rock, this track for sure shows that the band were still able to accomplish complex compositions worthy of 70s Yes. So this is the song proper really, with the previous section serving as a prelude. The mood of the song is kind of dark. Rabin wrote it during some depressed times after talks for a possible solo record deal fell through. Rabin sings the verses now, and this is the first time that you can really hear his voice clearly, when it's not mixed into the back or buried in a display of multi-part harmony. His chorusy guitar work remains consistent through the verses, and apart from that, the arrangement is pretty sparse. This got cold fast. The chorus is a lot more active and full, and Anderson takes over lead singing duties. I think I like the verses a little bit more though. They're stronger melodically. The rhythm section during the chorus actually falls back a bit and lets the block chords on keys and constant hi-hat rhythm and vocals keep it going. The verses feature a halftime drum beat compared with the choruses, which is yet another arrangement trait that appears at several points on this record. There's a soft, almost jazzy sounding guitar solo here that's bookended by two different linking sections. You know this is the 80s. If there's a guitar player in your band, you have to make them lay down a solo at some point. The final verse is delivered by Anderson, which leads into the final set of choruses, again in the now typical 90125 fashion, consisting of bit-by-bit layering of vocals and build-up in intensity. This culminates in one final changes in huge-sounding multi-track vocal harmony, and then we're hit with one more appearance of the opening 17/8 section to finish off the track quite satisfyingly. This whole structure of the song, with the fast riff-led segment at the start, which fades into the slower motif where most of the song lies, and only to finish off with one more mention of the faster intro section. This sounds just like Survival or Harold's Land off their debut album. So this is really Yes going back to their roots. Whether they intended to form a similar structure or not, I think it's amusing and interesting, and goes to demonstrate that this band is still very much Yes. Now, side B opens with a 2-minute long instrumental track called Cinema, paying tribute to the band that never really was. This track was a short segment taken from a 20-minute long composition that Cinema were working on called Time, and I don't think it was ever recorded in its entirety in any way. It's mostly in 7/4 time and is led by electric guitar playing the melody. It features Squire playing a bass line heavy on the effects. Maybe this marks a return of his Neutron bass pedal. The song goes through a couple of different segments that you might classify as a verse and chorus, varying them up a bit each time, with impromptu solos from guitar and some extra embellishments coming from the bass track. White mostly plays 16ths on snare with some tricky sounding patterns on hi-hat, playing a 16th after the kick drum. A big distant choir of oohs and ahs gets introduced towards the end, ending on an energetic, almost Queen-like finish. This sounds like it belongs on a stage in front of an arena-sized audience, with an overall very raw-sounding arrangement and delivery with minimal studio magic. It's not my favorite track, but it's a solid performance that doesn't outstay its welcome. And this track actually got Yes their first and only Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance in 1984. Well, the thoroughly raw sound of Cinema is completely cast aside with the next track, Leave It. Probably the most heavily processed and polished track of their entire career, and consequently their most 80s sounding song ever, I'd say. It starts off with a huge, reverby, multi-tracked a cappella segment, and I think solely consists of lots of Rabins and Squires with no Andersons. This track and Cinema have the distinction of being the only tracks on the album without any creative input from Anderson. And this kind of reminds me of the opening for I've Seen All Good People from over 10 years before this, though they sound so much better here. Anyway, at the very end of this vocal section, all the reverb disappears and the final word of the opening is completely devoid of reverb, and is a shocking way to get into the song proper. This whole interplay of reverb and no reverb is so great and so skillfully carried out. The opening verse offers a brand spanking new instrumentation from the band, largely consisting of robotically precise a cappella doos, doot, doot, doos, and gets you thinking, wait, is the whole song going to be a cappella? Well, no. You get some organ work and percussion samples that do frankly add a lot to the arrangement, which would sound quite sparse if it was just a cappella. I'm pretty sure Alan White is somewhere in the vocals as well. Trevor Rabin sings the first verse. It's very cool and a totally new sound by S, so you don't really notice that the verse is just one chord because it's interesting to listen to. Then a couple of humongous echoey tom hits usher in the chorus of the song, which is similarly monochordous. The drum beat, I think, is provided by a drum machine, either that or one of those electronic drum kits played by White. So the drum sound especially contributes to the overwhelming 80s-ness of this track, and it's quite sublime. The dense vocal harmonies go through the choruses as well, and Squire plays a chunky bass riff in unison with Kay on an electric organ. Maybe it's Kay, maybe it's Rabin, I don't know. In any case, this is so cool. On verse 2, John sings the lead vocals, and I'd imagine since he doesn't have a writing credit on this track, he just replaced Rabin's original line, word for word. The vocals continue to build up in layers, increasing the complexity of their sound. And after a brief bridge section, they reprise the opening a cappella with a lot more moxie. They continue to add melody lines on top of the final choruses, and the song ends suddenly with one final "Leave it!" This whole track is absolutely magic, though it's pretty devoid of any rock touches save for some guitars in the bridge. It's very poppy and so immensely cool from start to finish. This really is a studio song, and you really couldn't make this work live unless you were accompanied by an a cappella ensemble or something. There's lots of editing in the singing, which makes it sound unnatural, and the vocals were also sampled into a synclavier, so it's all very heavily processed stuff. In their live shows, I'm pretty sure that near always they used the playback of the studio vocals on top of their live instrumentals and lead vocals. They released it as a single and it performed pretty well. Not as good as Owner though. And they filmed a music video for it too, which became this whole big event, really. But the raw footage was just the band standing still in their yuppie suits, singing the vocals. But the directors of the video, Godfrey and Krem, who are also former members of the band 10cc, they used some state-of-the-art digital effects and played around with the basic footage and turned the band members into digital 2D cutouts and stretched them out and removed their heads, made them spin, and they cascaded them over a virtual staircase and all that good stuff. It was all very wacky fun, and they made 18 different versions of the video, with each one utilizing different effects. The first one was just the raw footage of the band upside down, and MTV played all the versions, like one every day I think, making it into like Leave It season. The 11th edit was chosen as the official video, and that's what's up on Yes's official YouTube channel now. Check it out, please. So cool. Next is the track Our Song, which gets back to a more rock-infused style. It's quite bouncy and upbeat, led largely by a riff on bass and guitar, with some soft synths keeping the chords. There's great interplay between the drums that keep the 4/4 beat going while the rest of the band play runs and patterns based on counting in threes. Another display of musical maths. The chord progression in the verses is pretty interesting and unexpected. This song is pretty much led by Anderson all the way through and is accompanied by harmony all the way through as well, which gets pretty dense in some places and sounds amazing. The choruses have a halftime feel in the beat. I like the verses better melodically. I don't know, not much to say about this one. It's a nice, fun track that better displays the rock capabilities of this rock band while still retaining a thoroughly 80s keyboard touch. This is followed by probably the heaviest track on the album, City of Love, mostly written by Rabin, and it was inspired by his experiences in a rough neighborhood. It's based around a simple two-note or two-chord riff on bass and overdriven guitar. It sounds rather metal. Might as well take over. It sounds like there's a sample of an orchestra warming up in the beginning, which is never mentioned again. It's okay, I guess, but maybe I just don't get it. Anderson sings leads for this song, but Trevor Rabin comes in for some intermittent "Hey!" and "Ow!" and some counter vocal lines. The keyboard stuff. Tony Kaye, I guess, or maybe Rabin, keeps pretty chill throughout the piece so that the drums, bass, and guitar do all the heavy lifting in this song, playing basic chords on bright keys for the most part. The choruses get crowded with backing vocals, while the verse remains a bit more airy. There's some great breakdowns that allow Rabin and Squire to play with each other. Rabin spits out a couple of filthy guitar solos too, taking gross advantage of his whammy bar. The ending is a bit abrupt for my liking, ending with a deep keyboard dud, when I think a fade out would have been more appropriate, considering the repeating riff goes on for quite a while at the end, and honestly was on the verge of becoming too repetitive anyway. It's a pretty cool track. Huge mood swings on side B, from Leave It to City of Love. Now, this leads to the final track of the album, Hearts. Like the closer on side A, Changes, this too has an extended song length, clocking in at nearly 8 minutes. It opens with a little riff played on light, tinkly keys and tuned mallet percussion. Glockenspiel maybe? I think I need help in this one. This would be a recurring theme throughout the song, in typical Yes fashion. Then John comes in singing words and phrases 2 syllables at a time, again, in typical classic Yes fashion. He is accompanied by Chris Squire playing the same 2-note motif on bass, which may have a clone effect applied. Maybe. The arrangement continues to be intriguingly empty as Rabin shows up to sing the first verse. He then relinquishes his lead singing duties over to John, who then carries the main melody for the rest of the song. The instrumentation quite slowly builds up, with the bass line making itself more complex and white banging on toms twice per bar. It's quite odd, but interesting. They perform this lovely, dreamy instrumental linking section that occurs maybe twice in the song. I would have liked to have heard it a bit more actually, and it really reminds me of their older compositions. The verses are quite menacing in tone. They're in minor, and also there's a sustained low "ah" that goes through the later verses and makes the music sound severe. Then contrastingly, the choruses are very positive and hopeful, playing a chord progression that at some points reminds me of something Jeff Lynne from ELO would do. Like in some previous songs before, Anderson sings his line in the middle, while Trevor and Chris sing a counter melody in a sort of call and response arrangement. It's all great and uplifting, and truly brings me back to the grandiose messages of hope that came from Yes's heyday. There's a few guitar solos in here actually, and each one takes on a slightly different mood and sound. The whole band settle into a nice powerful groove that is sustained for the whole song. This track also features an organ solo from Kaye, which is a bit lacking. It's not as interesting as I would have wanted it to be really. It's on top of a really heavy segment that gets dangerously close to sounding like City of Love, playing a similar overdriven 2-chord guitar riff. In contrast, Rabin's guitar work in the choruses is quite pleasant, broken chords drenched in chorus. His last guitar solo right before the final chorus is my personal highlight, exhibiting a melodic movement and technical ability that honestly sounds like maybe something Brian May would do. Wonderful work. After the final chorus is the coda, consisting of dreamy, soft synth pads underneath one final stanza from John Anderson, presenting his typical scripture about magic, constellations, yada yada. Like so many instances before, his vocal track, with a healthy amount of reverb, loses all of the reverb in his last line, delivering his final words in a clean, dry, intimate setting. The last chord of the piece leaves the composition unresolved. Like, wow, that was great. And not just the last track, but the whole album. It would be hypercritical It would be hypocritical of me to criticize this for not sounding like typical Yes, because I change my style of music with every new release. Even so, I have pointed out many times how I hear lots of similarities with their 70s compositions, despite the album being incredibly poppy and readily accessible at face value. To me, this just sounds like Yes in the 1980s, which is exactly what this is, I think. Trevor Horn's production is outstanding and practically flawless, making the best sounding Yes album to date. Taking the album for what it is, I'm gonna rate it what I truly think it deserves. 9.0125 out of 10. It's one of their best albums, and in fact I'd say that it's one of the best albums of the 80s. But this is just my opinion, so feel free to disagree. The album was released in November 1983, and quickly became the biggest album of their entire career, and sold over 3 million copies in the US alone. They went on to do a huge tour, mixing their new material in with old favorites like I've Seen All Good People, Roundabout, and Starship Trooper, giving all those tracks a fresh new 80s makeover. The band were also one of the headlining acts in the first ever Rock in Rio festival in 1985. I don't recommend it because, for whatever reason, they performed Leave It completely live, without the a cappella playback, and they sound absolutely horrible trying to sing all those parts live. So that's that. This was a huge deal for them, so I guess they could afford not making a new album for a while. But they did of course make something new eventually, in 1987. So was it more of a return to their roots, or was it basically 90126? Well, check out my hot take on the Big Generator album, coming at you this Thursday. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe for more original music and music reviews. Special thanks to my patrons, and if you're interested in contributing, there's links to my Patreon and original music in the description down below. Thanks again. See you around. Thanks again. See you around. Woo! God damn, that's long.